Hello, good morning students. Today we'll clear the concept of conservation of wildlife. As you know, wildlife is a very important concept because it is responsible for providing us clean water, clean air, medicines, food, timber, as well as the survival of individual. It is made possible only because of the wildlife. It is very important to conserve the wildlife to maintain the ecological balance in the nature and preserve the gene pool. For that, what happens, laws should be made so that total ban on killing of the animals as well as bird species of endangered species should be there. Second, indiscriminate killing should not be allowed by the forest authorities. Next, natural habitat should be preserved. Then government should conduct periodic survey in all the forest national parks as well as sanctuaries to know the population of wild species. Special attention for conservation of endangered species should be there to prevent their extinction. Depletion of forest should not be there, and reforestation is made compulsory. Very important steps which are taken by the Indian government to protect the wildlife. First, Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, under which the protected areas like national parks, sanctuaries, conservation reserves, community reserves were created, and the punishment was imposed on those indulging in illegal act of hunting. Second, very important is Wetland Conservation and Management Rules 2010. They were drafted to protect the wetlands in India. Then the illegal trade of wildlife and of endangered species should be protected, was protected by Wildlife Crime Control Bureau. Then special organizations like Wildlife Institute of India, Bombay Natural History Society, Sleem Ali Center for Ornithology and Natural History was framed. Then the government banned the veterinary use of diclofenac drug in order to protect the vultures. Various other things they were planned by the government of India to protect the wildlife. Now, there are different methods for conservation of wildlife. One is in situ and second is XC2. In situ means the conservation of species in natural habitat or ecosystem. For example, protected areas, national parks, sanctuaries, biosphere reserve. Now it is very important because they are cheap and convenient way of conserving the biological diversity. It offers a way to preserve large number of organisms simultaneously, known as well as unknown organisms. The existence in natural ecosystem provides opportunity for living organism to adjust to different environmental conditions and evolve into a better life form. The main disadvantage is it requires large space of earth, which is often difficult because of growing demand of space. Second is XC2 Conservation. It involves maintenance and breeding of endangered plants and animals in partially or wholly controlled conditions. For example, zoos, garden, nursery, gene seed bank, field gene bank, etc. It has various advantages. For example, it gives longer lifetime and breeding activity to animals. Genetic techniques can be utilized. Captivity breeding can be made. And disadvantages, the favorable conditions may not be maintained always. New life forms cannot evolve. This technique involves only few species. In situ conservation. First in situ conservation is national park. A national park is an area which is strictly reserved for the betterment of wildlife. where activities like grazing, cultivation are not permitted. It has got core zone, buffer zone, and reclamation zone. No private ownership can be there. It is marked in IUCN category 2 protected areas. First national park in India was established in 1936 and is known as Jim Corbett National Park. In India now, there are 104 existing national parks covering the area of about 40,000 kilometers square, which is 1.23% of geographical area of the country. Sanctuary is a protected area which is reserved for conservation of only animals and human activities like harvesting of timber, collection of minor forest products. Private ownership rights are allowed as long as they do not intervene with the well-being of the animals. There are 551 wildlife sanctuaries in India covering 1,19,000 kilometers square, that is 3.64% of geographical area of the country. Sanctuaries are enlisted in IUCN category 4 protected area. Good example is Sukhna in Chandigarh. Biosphere Reserves under Man and Biosphere Program, that is MAB of UNESCO. Biosphere Reserves were created. In India, there are 18 Biosphere Reserves. Biosphere Reserves, they are included in IUCN category 5 of protected areas. In the Biosphere Reserve, human settlement is also there. That is, the protection of culture is also there along with the core zone, buffer zone, reclamation zone and cultural zone. So, good example is Nilgiri Biosphere Reserves, Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserves. Sacred groves. Sacred groves in India are forest fragments which are communally protected. There are about 14,000 sacred groves which are reported all over India and acts as a reserve for rare fauna. Good example is Thar Desert of Rajasthan maintained by Bishnoi, Rainforest of Western Ghat in Kerala. They are maintained by local people. Here hunting and logging are strictly prohibited. Conservation reserves and community reserves. Conservation reserves and community reserves in India are terms denoting protected areas in India which are typically acting as buffer zone to or connectors and migration corridors between established national park, wildlife sanctuary, reserved and protected forest in India. Such areas are designated as conservation area if they are uninhabited and completely owned by Government of India. These protected areas categories are first introduced in Wildlife Amendment Act of 2002. XC2 Conservation. Various examples of XC2 Conservation are gene banks. Gene banks are type of biorepository which preserves genetic material. In plants, this could be by freezing cuts from the plant or stocking the seeds. In animal, it is the freezing of egg or sperms in zoological freezers until further need. Seed gene bank. Second, it is the easiest way to store germplasm of plants at low temperature. Seeds are small but tough and have evolved to survive all methods of adverse condition. There are two types of seeds, orthodox and recalcitrant seeds. Orthodox seeds, they can be dried and stored at temperature of minus 20 degrees centigrade. Almost all species in temperate flora can be stored in this way. Recalcitrant seeds, they die when dried and frozen in this manner. Acorns of oak are recalcitrant seeds. Field gene bank. Genetic variability also be preserved by field gene bank under normal growing condition. They provide easy and ready access to plant genetic resources for characterization, evaluation or utilization, while the same material conserved in the form of seed, in vitro or cryo must be germinated and regenerated and grown before it can be used. Cryopreservation is a very important process where cell and whole tissue are preserved by cooling to sub-zero temperature, that is minus 196 degree centigrade, the boiling point of liquid nitrogen. At these cold temperature, any biological activity, including the biochemical reactions that would cause cell death, is effectively stopped. Botanical garden. More than 1500 botanical garden or arboretum are there in the world. Zoos. In world there are about 800 zoos. Such zoos have about 3000 species of vertebrates. Aquaria are meant for research and public information and education. Marine as well as freshwater species are subject of captive breeding programs in aquaria. Then frozen zoo. The Zoological Society of San Diego has established a frozen zoo to store such samples using modern cryopreservation technique. A frozen zoo is a storage facility in which genetic material taken from the animals, that is the DNA, sperms, eggs, embryos, are gathered and thereafter stored at low temperature for optimal preservation over a long period. Example is San Diego Zoo Frozen Zoo at San Diego Zoo Conservation Research in USA. They currently store a collection of 8400 samples from over 800 species and subspecies. Very important challenges during reintroduction of species to the wild. First is the diseases. Introduction of new diseases to the habitat, which may be carried out by the individual which is to be introduced in the new environment. Then second is the behavior. The behavior of the individual may be different because some behaviors, as you know, are genetically determined and innate, whereas others are learned because they don't had any experience of learning. That is why the captive bred population lack in situ learning. Next is genetic races. Reintroduced population may be an entirely different genetic makeup of original population. Then is the habitat. Areas must first be restored to allow captive population to be reintroduced. Only limited individuals should be introduced, which the habitat can support.